Welcome to the SWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. We're here with one of our guest hosts, Ian Xiao, and we're friends from a past life at one of the big four consulting firms. And I'd love if you gave us a little bit of an intro. I know you're in kind of the consulting space, you're in kind of AI, and we'll kind of track you when you were a kid up until right now. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll get into the backstory later on.
Yeah, for sure, Loki. Thanks for having me. My name is Ian Xiao. I'm a manager at one of the big consulting firms, spending a lot of my daytime helping clients to use AI better and be more responsible in the space. I was a immigrant from China, spent about 15 years in Canada. Love to talk about my journey throughout.
Sounds good. So why don't we start off with Ian as a kid? So what was Ian like growing up? I don't know if you have any early fond memories or happy memories that you've gone through. And then I'd love to hear some of the influences that helped you along the way to kind of get you to where you are now. So we'll kind of walk through that. So what was Ian like growing up?
Yeah, for sure. I would say like I'm pretty happy like throughout like my childhood, which is I'm super fortunate and grateful for, given how hard my parents work. Like I think growing up in China, like people face one of the issue that people face is usually around stress around school, right? And I would say like that's like definitely one of the most like memorable like moments when I grew up. But like in addition to that, like I think like I was born in a time where things are going pretty well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a lot of like time to play, a lot of enough like resources to buy stuff that we wanted, right? Compared to like let's say our parents' generation, right? Because
Sure.
they're coming out from like maybe like the post-war area where like people are still trying to figure out what's going on, right? So like I'm definitely very lucky to have a pretty good childhood, right?
That's amazing. So
Yeah,
growing up in China, you mentioned kind of that stress around school. Can you describe
yeah,
some of that? Because I know there are things like the Gaokao exam where like that's
yeah.
the huge source of stress. But for those that aren't familiar with that, can you kind of tell us a little bit about that
Yeah,
environment?
for sure. The Gaokao, I think of it as like one exam, like it's the standardized entry exam to university, right? And a lot of people say that like this exam determine your life.
Right.
So you do good, you're set.
Yeah.
If you don't do well, then like you're kind of doomed, right? Like based on what my experience and my friends' experiences, it's kind of over exaggerated, I would
Mm.
say, but like definitely impose a lot of like stress for student like myself included going through that process because you don't want to take the chance,
Right.
right? So one is it definitely like impose a lot of like stress like for just going through like years of study, but at the same time the good thing coming out of that is it trains you to be a lot more disciplined, I would
Mm.
say, right? But like again, like going back to my earlier point, like I think we definitely had the luxury of like having more resources than our parents. So we do have, we can definitely spend time outside of classroom to pursue like other hobbies and stuff like that, right?
Cool. So tell me a little bit about kind of what you thought you would be doing, assuming that you aced the Gaokao or whatever, right? Like, did you
Yeah,
have a sense on, because the typical Asian is doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, that sort of thing. Did you
yeah.
have those aspirations? And obviously you're in consulting right now. So how did that kind of factor into the
Yeah, so yeah, the typical Asian, I would say, career path definitely was on the table, like doctor, engineers, lawyers, accountants. They were definitely one of those, one of the considerations. Um, but when I was in China, I actually want to become a fighter jet pilot because I
interesting?
thought cool. So that's actually what I wanted to do after like me finishing the exam, right? But my mom did not like that at all.
Understandable, yeah.
Risk that you have to take, right? But No, I ended up studying electrical and computer engineering in Canada, right? And then I became a consultant, a business consultant afterwards, but definitely still stay really close to the technology space. Happy to talk about our journey as well.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about like the decision to go to Canada and kind of the application process and kind of like settling around it and doing that. Like, what was that experience? Because you were an international student?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, again, I think like I was super grateful because we had the support. So in terms of like the application process, it was not extremely hard for me personally because I went to pretty good school in China, did relatively well. So like all the entry requirements is not as it's not a challenge for me at that point. Financial wise, like I think like pretty grateful to like my family, like they were really supportive and we have the right resources in place, right? I would say going through the process, the most challenging part is really just getting used to having to speak English every day.
Okay.
From before, which is you only speak in English classes
Right.
in China, right? But yeah, so I think that would be that's one of my major I would say adjustment that I need to make going from China to Canada.
And what were some of the considerations in terms of picking a school, right? So were you always focused on Canada, and then how did UFT and how did you decide on kind of the various?
Yeah, yeah, we meaning myself and my parents were definitely considering schools not just in Canada. We were also looking at the US as well.
Okay.
Couple factors that went into it. Number one is back in the days, the US to Chinese exchange rate is super expensive. So
All right. Okay.
it's definitely one consideration. Like we were in a good spot, but definitely not super rich, right?
Right.
And then second of all, it's also family, right? Because we have close family in Canada, so it's easier, at least for my parents. So I came by myself. So my parents are still in China. So when when we consider where I should go, definitely it's easier for them and also just peace of mind for them if I stay close to families. So that's why we narrow it down to Canada. And within Canada, I think the obvious choice is Toronto or Vancouver for Asian background people, right? Because it's a more population in those two cities. And it just happened to my uncle who's in Canada. He's in Toronto, so that's how I landed in Toronto. Yeah.
And were your parents, did they have anything to do with the engineering side, or did you have a lot of engineers in the family?
No, I'm actually the first engineer in the family.
Okay.
My dad is a architect, so he still practice. I wanted, like when I was deciding for to choose what to study. Obviously, like being a jet pilot is definitely on the table.
Okay.
Then it's between the traditional, I would say, the Asian careers, like lawyers and doctors, whatever, right? I was super bad in biology, so doctor is definitely not for me. I don't get excited about accounting, so I can do it, but I don't get excited about it. But I'm really excited about physics and chemistry, and also computer. So if you look at that, the subset is, you just point towards like engineering and computer science.
Okay, cool. So you're now, I guess, in Toronto studying engineering, and now you have to speak English on a daily basis. What was the process like, or what was the experience like, kind of integrating in, getting used to kind of the new culture? Did you experience some of the culture shock? Because I've heard mixed stories where some people are like, well, because Toronto's so multicultural, actually, it's not. But what was your experience like?
It's a mix, I would say. And I think like for me, I was pretty intentional to integrating into, I would say, the English speaking community, just because like I know I want to develop my career here in Toronto, so I have to speak good enough English, right? So I spent a lot of time, hanging out with English-speaking communities in university, right? Versus a lot of some of my peers will actually stick with their own maybe Chinese-speaking groups. I still do that. definitely love my identity. I do have connection to the Chinese speaking communities, but on a day-to-day basis, I really want to focus my time um, spending more time with like people who can teach me how to speak proper English,
Sure.
right? And like there's no shortcut. You just need to spend time and spend time speaking it, practicing it, and also just really understanding like how like the nuances in different way of people articulating messages, right? Yeah, so definitely spend. I would highly encourage people to focus in this area if they are thinking about transitioning. Yeah.
And were you very purposeful about that in terms of like every day you reflected, oh, okay, what do they mean by that? Or you have to look up in the dictionary different things, or were there any like programs that helped you along the way, or was it really just like through osmosis you picked it up or something else?
Yeah, I would say that it's a latter case because I couldn't carry a dictionary around.
Okay.
And also at the same time, I think like it's also part of the process. I would say, like, I would just ask them, hey, what do you mean by this?
Okay.
Even like it might be normal for like people who speak English as a first language, but
Sure.
like I've never come across people who laugh at you when you actually are asking
Mhm.
what you mean by that, like in a genuine way. I guess they know you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's also like forced me to communicate and try to comprehend what English people or what English speaking people mean by different lingos, for example, or different when they make jokes, right? Like sometimes like it's hard to pick up some of those cues, you know.
Was there anything particularly like challenging for you to understand, or what was the most like this thing didn't make sense for the longest time? Was there any of those types of moments that you can recall?
Um, it's less about the latter. It's more about like the most challenging part is really try to like pick up the accent, I would say, or
Okay.
eliminate the accent. I still have it,
Okay.
but like it's really hard to um, completely get rid of it, right? Especially when you try to learn and try to speak so much when you're later in, like when you're a bit older, right? But I say older when I was like 16 or 17.
Yeah.
But
You're
it's a
not that
lot
old.
difficult at that point compared to when you're trying to pick it up when you're like 4, right? So
Actually, we have one of our previous guests was a speech language pathologist, and they actually specialize in kind of accent modification. Where yeah, so if you're interested, you can
love to
connect.
do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
love to
and
like get some help on that.
yeah. So it sounds like it's just kind of a little bit of that fitting in, and yeah, it sounded like part of the great things is you were always willing to kind of ask and be curious about that. And that really helped you along the way. So so as you're progressing through your university career, then how did consulting come into play? Because for me, that was not on my radar at all. So I'm not sure where it was for you in the process.
Yeah, I think it's just by accident. I did not consider being a professional consultant when in school. I wanted to become a engineer working at, let's say, Hydro One, right? Or be a software engineer working at like Google, for example, right? Yeah, so I think it happened by chance because I think one of my closer friend at school, he's like maybe 2-3 years older, but he went into consulting, right? So that kind of gave me the exposure to it and kind of planted the seed, right? And how in terms of how it became my career of choice right out of school, I think a lot of like I think it happened over time. Even when I know about the career path, I did not jump into it, right? Because I didn't know what it is and what the day-to-day looks like. But obviously, like after talking to my friend, like I get a sense of what the day-to-day looks like, what kind of problem they work on, etc. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then on the other end, I was still pursuing kind of the engineering route. So I actually did multiple internships throughout my school at different places with the that has very different nature of work. So I started as a researcher, right? Because I thought I want to become like maybe a researcher, like super deep technical in a research field, right? I started doing research, did not like it, so move away from that. And then I moved into software development. Did some of that. I still like it, right? But I think I like it more as a hobby than I want to spend like 10 hours a day doing it. And then slowly moving into more business focusing roles. At U of T, at University of Toronto, we have this program called PY. So essentially it's a 16-month co-op program that you take between year 3 and year 4, right? So when I got to my third year, I had the opportunity to work as a product manager, right? So it was also a deliberate choice because I've tried something else that for sure I didn't like, or I know I don't want to spend my full-time job with, right? So I tried something slightly different, like the business side of things, including like the way they think, the way they talk, the problem that they solve on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's like slowly moving me towards kind of like the business side of things. And then eventually, when I'm about time to graduate, I think consulting come up again because all the consulting firms come to campus to recruit, right? So after talking to like different people from different firms, right, I know like that's like my number one choice in terms of career path right after school.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about those kind of research and the dev experiences. Were those like internships? Were those like part-time jobs? Were there like, how did you get those experiences? Is that part of school or something solely outside?
Yeah, so the research one job I did was in the summer after my second year.
Okay.
So I talked to a professor that taught a course I really like, right? And I just asked, hey, are you hiring someone to help with research in the summer? And one thing led to another, and said, hey, like, why don't you spend like 4 months with us in the lab and see if you like it, right?
Okay.
So that's really it. That's really it. It's not a job that I apply through a public posting. It's just talking to someone that you respect, that you want to spend some time with, you want to learn from, and see where that goes.
Mm-hmm. And then the other ones, like the software dev, those weren't like official jobs, or were they?
No, they're not. So the software one is mostly a side project. So I'm always interested in startups or building something, right? As an engineer. So a friend and I decided to spend some time in the summer to create something, right? And part of that requires writing software, right? So that's kind of my exposure to it. It's not a formal job or anything, right? But it still gave me the experience of programming.
So it sounds like for those opportunities, one of it was just staying connected. So that connection with your professor and expressing 100%. Interest. And I guess the second one is also interest, where you guys decided to take that interest to the next level and actually do something about it and just kind of experiment on that side. So cool.
Yeah.
And from your path, I guess, now that you're close to graduating, you found consulting again. How was the hiring experience, I guess, after graduation? Did you have something waiting for you when you graduated, or did you have kind of the foresight to start applying beforehand, or what was that process like?
So I did plan a bit beforehand. So I was lucky enough to actually have a few offers before I graduate. Yeah, so I definitely did not want to wait until the end where I was, what I'm gonna do now, right? Yeah, so I did go through the process with consulting firms. I would say in the first or second month in my fourth year, because that's usually what the campus recruiting cycle looks like for consulting firms. Went through the process, and as you know, like I think the process is pretty straightforward and transparent and short. So I have the offer, I think I would say mid-October in my first semester in my fourth year, which is great because in my second semester I can just do whatever I want and don't have to worry about it. Right.
Yeah, and I guess as a word of guidance for folks that are in school, plan ahead, right? Because some firms do hire well ahead of graduation, sometimes a year in advance, sometimes 8 months, sometimes 4 months or whatever. So don't wait until like the April before graduation until you start looking, because sometimes a lot of the prime roles are already taken out. So
yeah, for sure. I think like as students or a listener to the podcast, I think like the summer, I would say like the third and fourth year will be like the prime time to get ready, because a lot of company will be hiring for interns who are in their third year, right? And a lot of those internships actually lead to full-time positions after you graduate, right? And then fourth year is obviously for full-time positions. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So having run campus, I think the easiest way to get a full-time hire is go through a co-op and then get hired in as a full-time, because actually the co-op hiring process is actually a little bit easier in the sense there's fewer activities, fewer interviews to go through, and then it's
and also less
technically
expectation from the employer too, right? Because they
Yeah.
know you're still a student.
For sure. And then it becomes like a 4-month long interview, right? Because
Yeah.
we do have the option of saying no, but chances are you still do pretty good and you can continue on. So now that you're in at Deloitte, or you said you had 2 offers, so you had a choice. So how did you make a decision between one and the other? Like what were your choices?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to salary, because
Okay.
just full transparency, and I think that's something practical that we have to consider, right?
Sure.
Because like given my own personal situation, I do want to kind of set up my roots in Toronto, right? So having a decent salary definitely helps in terms of like, let's say, buying a house, for example, right? And also having more saving to travel in Canada.
Yeah.
That also helps. So salary is definitely number one. And then I would say the firm reputation is another one, right? So I got an offer from a big firm, another one from a mid-size, mid-market firm, right? I took the one from the big firm because number one, better salary. Number two, better brand name, so that bigger company usually offers like more like a bigger platform to grow, right? And also there are mechanism in places to help train younger folks, right? And then if at one point decide to leave, right, it's a good name on the resume, so
Sure. Yeah.
that people recognize.
Cool. So talk to us about kind of the startup into consulting, because you know a little bit about it but weren't too familiar with it, and then how was kind of the journey there, and then you decide to leave, and then spoiler alert, you came back. But show us if you can describe a little bit about that journey. That would be helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think like in terms of like my experience joining the firm, it's not very different from what I expected, because I did talk to a lot of people throughout my interview process. And just as I prepare for interviews, I start knowing more people who spend time in the consulting industry. So I kind of know what they do on a day-to-day basis. But obviously, like depends on the firm, depends on the practice or the group you join. The work you do is slightly different, right? So for me, I think like not much surprises in terms of what I do. But what I would say I needed to adjust is to learn how to manage up. And that's something that I still need to I think we all need to learn how to do as you progress in your career, just managing up, managing sideways, managing down, right?
Sure.
But when I joined, it's like kind of at the bottom of the totem pole, you can only manage up, right? So that's something that I need to learn, because in consulting, we do work in a pretty high pace environment, right? It's definitely not a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes directions and the work are not very well defined, right? It's very different from school where, hey, like just answer this exam question, then you get like 100%, right? Or you have like past exam that you can practice on. The stuff you do in consulting firm is, I would say, almost the opposite of that, right? So definitely need to spend some time learning how to navigate and manage like uncertainty. That's something that I spend a lot of time learning to do. Now, after I spent about 4.5 years at the firm, there's a couple opportunities that came up, and then that opened up opportunity for me to actually explore other options, right? To your point. So I actually left the firm. I spent a year in New York just because I actually wanted to spend some time in a different city before it's too late. So I highly recommend to live in New York if you get a chance once in your life. So I spent some time there, and then I joined a tech startup in Toronto, and then we spent about 2 years working on that. We actually exited from that. We got acquired by Square, and then that also opened up an opportunity for me to think about, hey, what's next, right? And then I decided to come back to the firm.
Cool. So can you go back to, I guess, that first exit? So you decided to go to New York.
Yeah.
What are kind of the circumstances or the decision considerations that were being had at the time? So were you like kind of at a plateau where you didn't want to, couldn't learn anymore, or was it more like, ooh, there's this bright shiny object and have to go follow it, or what are some of them?
I think I'm just like very curious about like what it's like outside of Toronto, because I think at that point in time, I spent about almost up to 10 years in Toronto.
Okay.
And again, I'm like super fortunate and in a good position to have things set up in Toronto. And then at that time, I'm also engaged with my longtime girlfriend back then, right? So we were like, hey, like, you know what, like, it's like we really want to explore what's out there before we like 100% settle down, right? And like we've visited New York before and say, hey, like this is a place that we want to, you know, explore and experience, right? So decided to go there. I actually did my master at NYU when I was in New York. 100% cover in terms of scholarship, so it's pretty low cost for me in that situation. And on top of that, what I really wanted to get out, in addition to live in New York, is also meet people that I did not get a chance to meet. Right? People from like different, you know, walks of life, I would say, right? People from the finance industry, because New York, you know, Wall Street, right? Make some really good connection with my time there. Still stay in touch with them. Yeah, so I think it's just like having more story in life, you know. And that's that. It's really about that. I think like now I think back, I think it's something that I would definitely do again. Right? And I would highly encourage people to, if situation allow, definitely explore and try different things.
Cool. And do you have one story that you can share during that time?
Crazy story. So when I was in New York, I actually got recruited by one of the top hedge fund in New York.
Okay. And
the way I got that interview is by randomly talking to someone at Washington Square, because that's where the school is.
Okay.
So I always hear about how hard it is to break into, let's say, Wall Street, right? Or like getting interviews lined up. But sometimes a lot of these opportunities come up naturally when you are curious about other people, when you're putting yourself out there, right? And you're in a position to actually nurture those opportunities. Like sometimes they lead to like very interesting experience.
Cool. Yeah, I often recommend folks that are in the networking space to be interested instead of interesting, because too many people want to like fluff up themselves and be good, but just sometimes asking questions. So can you go into a few more details about that story, or no? Or is it telling too much?
No, I think it's I think it's just being very curious about like, you know, other people's work, right? And be genuinely curious. Like you can't fake it, right? Like people see it when you try to fake it.
Fair enough.
and like if you start to establish that that connection, I think like people are fully open to supporting you in whatever way they can. Right?
Cool.
Yeah.
And was the intent always to go back to Toronto, or were you supposed to kind of stay in New York or go elsewhere? What was the plan from there, or was it not defined yet?
No, I think at that time I was pretty open to options. We like Toronto. We have the network. We have like stuff in Toronto. And like when we spend time in the States, I think that make us appreciate Toronto even more. Just because I think it's pretty personal to me, because I think back in 2017 or 18, that's when a lot of stuff is happening in the US, right?
Okay.
Like politically, and it's just like the vibe you get when you live in the city, it's
Right.
very different than the lifestyle you get in Toronto, right?
Right.
And like I think like it's a really just a personal choice. I would say like Toronto definitely fits more in terms of like diversity, the way people talk, the way people think about things, right? And it's also at that time Toronto was the place for anything AI related. So
Okay.
when I was in New York, I actually feel like I'm missing out. That was a pretty strong feeling, right? Like everything interesting is coming out from University of Toronto. It's coming out from a Toronto community, right? So hey, like if I want to spend time in the AI space, I think Toronto is actually the good place to be. And we have all the resources we have in Toronto that we built up in the last couple of years before we moved to New York, right?
So what was your transition into AI? So that obviously started with your start in consulting through the data, the analytics space, and then grew into an interest in that. And did it continue on with the masters, or what was that journey like?
Yeah, it's I would say it's always been there. So when I was in school, so I went to University of Toronto. I did electrical and computer engineering, and obviously that's kind of like the central hub for AI research in Toronto. But it was not as hot back then, right? Sure. So I took like machine learning courses, but didn't know like it was such a in-demand skill set. So I always have that foundation. But as I get into like working at a consulting firm, like big data was like the most popular topic back in the day. Like, well, I think it still is. But as we go through like the big data transformation, it would open up. It really set up the foundation for more advanced analytics, which later became data science, right? But fundamentally, it's the same thing, right? So it's always been around in my life. I just didn't know like how I need to connect the dots and leverage my experience. Yeah, when I spent some time in New York, I actually study very specifically on data science, because I really want to understand what are some of the deep technical applications beyond things that I was exposed to in consulting firms, right? So I definitely decided to continue to invest my career and time in that space. After New York, there are a lot of startups that focus on AI, and there are a few really good ones in Toronto, and that's where I end up with, just given my interest and opportunity.
Cool. So can you walk us through kind of getting to those? So you mentioned you joined a startup, and then another AI firm, and then so spoiler, you went back to Deloitte. What was kind of that transition like? And is it back to like just random connections in like a square in Toronto that got you a job, or were there other things at play?
No, so like the job at the startup, it's actually through a friend from University of Toronto from a few years ago. So again, like I think in terms of how to get a job, staying connected with your network is definitely important, because like people grow and they move to do different things, and you never know when your path will cross again, right? Yeah, so like getting the startup job is just through another mutual connection, did not go through any formal application or interview process. And when I joined a startup, I focused a lot on product management, as well as I would say like very similar to what I did in consulting. So very client facing, like bringing our IP or intellectual property or tools into customers, right? I also spend a lot of time doing internal facing product development as well, right? Working with the engineering team and being part of the engineering team myself. So now, after spending 2 years at the startup, just because how the business went, we got picked up by Square because they wanted to open an office in Toronto, and the easiest way for everyone is just to acquire a company, right? So throughout the conversation, just how like Square want to position the startup team, does not really align well with what I want to like keep doing, right? Because throughout this whole experience, I still really enjoy the client-facing side of things, like bringing good technology, good IP into applications, right? So post-acquisition, that's not what we are going to do. So that opened up the opportunity for me to think about, hey, like, is this something I want to keep doing or not, right? So now transitioning back to Deloitte, it's also through a connection that I stay in touch with. Again, did not go through any formal application. So a lot of the conversations happen naturally and say, hey, like, we are investing in the AI space as the firm, right? So for people who don't know, Deloitte has the practice called Omnia AI. So that's where we focus our energy and services in bringing the latest and greatest AI technology into our clients. So at that time, Deloitte, I would say, just started up this practice, and they wanted to have people to come help build out different service offerings, right? So because my experience with my first chapter at Deloitte, right, as well as like my product experience in startups, and I think that fits what Deloitte Omnia AI is looking for in terms of their plan forward. So it was a mutual fit, and again, super informal process, just through connections that I built and nurtured throughout my career.
Yeah, that just speaks towards the power of networking. And like, if you don't want to have to go through the rigor of like the whole resumes and the applications and all that sort of stuff, you're better suited to do that anyway, because that whole process is so convoluted and challenging anyway. So a question on the startup one. Did you end up like, were you early enough to pick up any like exit out of that, or was it just
got some share, obviously not enough so that I can retire now, so got to keep working.
Yeah, so you got to keep working. So that's amazing. So that kind of brings us to present day, and there's probably a bunch of other stuff along the way. I know you try to do like a analytics bootcamp along that, and maybe speak a little bit to that journey and what you were trying to accomplish with that.
Yeah, for sure. So I started a bootcamp called Business Analytics Bootcamp, BAB for short. You can look it up on Google. So it's I would say it's a very targeted offering to students or professionals who's interested in technical analytics as well as business, right? So I've always interested in startups, and I think deep down, like fundamentally, it's just about building something new, right? And getting the feedback from people. Obviously, like, I prefer good feedback, but part of it is just like learning and pivoting, right? So I really enjoy that process as well. So when I think back in 2017, and I think that's really like when data science and analytics hiring boomed, right? But I saw there's a gap in terms of what school and I would say education service providers are not offering, which is connecting the dots between technical analytics and some kind of business domain application, right? Neither super business, like, MBA course that teach you how to talk about and understand analytics,
Mhm.
or the other end of the spectrum where you do like a deep like machine learning engineering course, and that leads you down to the PhD route, right? But there's nothing kind of in between, right? So that's something that I saw there's a white space, as well as there's a demand for it. Right?
Cool. So as we kind of wrap up, and hopefully we'll have you back on discussing things on like AI and machine learning, because I know that's a hot topic and a lot of people are confused and would like a little bit more knowledge
Yeah.
on that. And then maybe one of the things we didn't talk about was you writing on Medium, right? So you have an account that has quite a few followers. So we'd love to kind of get connected on that. But if you can kind of leave the audience with a few pieces of SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, like if you could talk to young Ian at whatever stage, and maybe multiple stages of your life, when you were stressing out. So maybe for those Gaokao exams, maybe even university, maybe as you're making decisions. But what are some of the pieces of SWIKE that you would want to share for yourself?
Yeah, be even more curious about other people.
Okay.
And number two would be meet as many people as possible.
Okay.
Because I did engineering at U of T, and I spent most of my time in the lab. So definitely, if I got a chance to do it again, I would definitely like try to spend more time to meet with people from different backgrounds, not just from engineering, but from like, let's say, business, from art, from science, right? You just never know where that relationship will lead you, not just only for jobs, but just for your, I would say, your intellectual curiosity and growth. Right?
And would you classify yourself as like an introvert or extrovert, like if you were to go use those words?
I would say at my natural self, I'm fully introverted.
Okay.
But I learned how to flex. That's Deloitte training 101.
Okay.
But you kind of like have to adjust it based on the situation. But I would say at my most natural self, I'm fully introverted. I love to spend my some time by myself to think, to ponder, to write, and Medium is one channel for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry, I cut you off. What were some of the other SWIKE that you would want to impart on yourself?
I would say try even more things if you get a chance to.
Okay.
And I think like a lot of the uncertainty or stress come from not knowing, right? But the solution for that is just to do it and do more of it. And as part of that, you kind of like eliminate all the things that you know you don't want to do, or you have no control of, right?
Right.
And as a result, you have more certainty, right?
Yeah. I think that's great. For the first one on curiosity for people, obviously you kind of touted without having to go through the application process for any of those previous jobs. That definitely helps, and then out of your own curiosity as well. And if you are an introvert, then you can learn to flex and and go more out of your shell. And I'm kind of the same way as well. I'm naturally introverted, but I can connect with people. Now try even more things. I think that's a great perspective, because if you are afraid of the unknown, like the only way to learn is to to experience it, right?
Exactly.
And then once you start knowing that, hey, none of the stuff is that bad, then you get used to it, and then the unknown is not as scary as well. So yeah, I think that's some amazing insights. Are there any kind of future aspirations that you're looking to go into? Obviously, growing your medium and maybe more things in the AI space. Are there any other areas of interest or any other piece of advice that you want to share?
Yeah, I definitely want to continue to spend my career and time on growing my experience in AI and product management. Continue to write, but I'm struggling to find the time and energy to write, just because it's getting pretty busy at work. That's something that I need to find a better mechanism of managing. Have not found a solution yet, but let me know if you have some good ideas. And I would say like something I want to do a bit more is stay physically active. I think it's just because of like COVID, like we all like
Sure.
we all locked in a room and we can't go out, right? So definitely want to spend some time getting back in shape, I would say. I'm starting to learn how and train for maybe a half marathon.
Ooh, okay.
So starting today. Let's see how far that goes in like 3 months.
Awesome. Yeah. So hopefully we'll have you back and get an update on the marathon progress, training progress, and maybe hold you accountable because you said it live and publicly here. So
yeah, now it's in the public. So
and on the suggestion for the writing, one thing that I often recommend for clients is to include what I call non-negotiable time. So basically half an hour a day, an hour a day, whatever you can allocate. And as busy as your life is, you have half an hour. You can do that. Like ideally at the beginning of your day before everything gets busy and then you can't really control it. And that's the time. If you want to put a perspective on it, imagine that you have a meeting with the CEO of kind of the most important company that exists, which is Me Inc., as in your life, the CEO of your life, which is you, right? And if you really want to put it, just imagine that Jeff Bezos wants to meet with you every day at whatever, 8 a.m. Are you going to cancel on him?
Definitely not.
Exactly. So put that kind of perspective on it and say, you know what, and I have to write whatever, a 500 word, 5,000 word Medium article, and you'll probably get it, right? Because there's always going to be more work. There's always going to be more stuff, and if you don't take care of the priority stuff, then it never gets done. So that'd be kind of a tidbit.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
So
and also like maybe write like shorter articles. Yeah, because like usually I try to write everything at once, but that takes a lot of time and energy to do it well, right? But if I can chop it up, and to your point, like do it maybe half hour chunks, that help. Yeah, I'll let you know how it goes.
Sounds good. So perfect. So thanks a lot, Ian, for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
For sure. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.